Welcome back. Now, major food retailers have been named in the meat label scandal that rocked the country earlier this year. A Sunday newspaper published a list of retailers whose meat products are incorrectly labeled, according to findings from a Stellenbosch University study. Joining us on the line now is the university's Professor Louw Hoffman. Professor Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, tell us more about the study that you conducted. What exactly were you looking for?
Good afternoon to you and your listeners. I think the main objective of the study was to try and see how compliant all our retailers as well as local butcheries in the meat industry were to the new labelling regulation.
Now, the revelations of the study were quite shocking. Tell us what you found.
I think you're quite right. They were shocking in the sense that a very large proportion of the retailers weren't compliant in listing all the ingredients. A typical example would be we would find, let's say, chicken in some sausages or one of the plant proteins. Now, in itself, these are typical ingredients that are regularly used. And our point was not that the use of these in processed meat products is incorrect. Our issue was with the fact that the consumer has the right to know what's in the sausage or in the patty that they're eating, and that according to regulations, the suppliers who are selling these products should actually put it on the label so that the consumer can decide himself whether he's interested in buying it or not.
Now, you also found that 60% of the 139 meat products you tested contained undeclared ingredients. What are some of these ingredients?
Okay, most of these ingredients would typically be plant proteins and or pork or chicken. The odd ones that we found was obviously the one that everyone by now knows about would be the donkey, and then the other would be the samples of water buffalo that we found. Although on the water buffalo issue, at that stage, they were all listed as bovine or beef, and that was, according to the national regulations, listed as correct. Because at that stage, we were classifying water buffalo as bovine. In our report, which was a scientific report, we pointed out that scientifically that is incorrect. Since then, the regulations have been adapted, and water buffalo is now classified as water buffalo and should then be held up on the list of the etiquette as water buffalo.
Now, those implicated in this research include the country's top retailers and directly affects a great number of consumers. Are there any health risks involved?
I think from the meat species viewpoint, no, there aren't any health risks involved. And I must also state that most of the supermarket retailers, they all have very good microbiological testing programs in place to ensure that there's no meat that is a health risk. Our issue was more linked around the allergens that were also found in the meat product. And the fact that a large number of these products contain these allergens and they weren't listed. And that is particularly a health risk if you are one of the X percentage of people in the national population who is allergic to one of these plant proteins. Then it definitely would be a health risk.
Now, Professor Hoffman, what happens from here? What do you do with the findings?
Well, we, as pertaining to our findings, we basically completed. Our objective was to test whether the industry was compliant, and if it wasn't, to make them and the public aware that they're not being compliant. Public awareness obviously comes from the right of the public to know what they're consuming, and also the right of the consumer to know that if I'm not happy with my product in the shop A, then I can leave and go and shop in shop B. So in that sense, I think we were very successful. What was also a spin-off of this was also to highlight to the regulators that although there are people, and that's mainly the Department of Health, whose responsibility it is to ensure that these products are labeled correctly, that wasn't being done. And in discussions with the Department of Health, one of the main factors that came out was a lack of funds. You know, the Department of Health is also responsible, for example, to monitor the water quality and the water safety of all the water consumed in South Africa. So obviously, the water would be a higher priority than to see whether all the different species in a sausage was listed correctly.
Now, have you had any response from the supermarkets that have been fingered in this report?
Well, not directly to myself, because remember in my scientific report we didn't name the supermarket. So in that sense, no. What I've noticed though in the supermarket, because as a meat scientist, whenever I go into any supermarket or butcher or shop that sells meat, I analyze and look at what's being presented. I'm glad to report that most of the supermarkets have now labeled their ingredient list correctly. And I'm quite happy with that whole scenario. Again, I think we managed to reach one of our goals that we set out to do, and that is to sensitize the supermarkets and to tell them get your house in order.
Now let's talk about these supermarkets. Can you name them for us?
Again, the university has taken the stance that we will only release the names to anyone who has gone through the legal route of asking us access into information. So at this stage, I'm sorry, I'm not at the liberty to discuss individual supermarkets.
Would you be at liberty to discuss what the implications are for these supermarkets? I think most South Africans would like to know what steps would be taken against them.
I think the implications. Okay, let's go back a step. My investigation was not a forensic investigation, and because it wasn't a forensic investigation, there's no forensic footprint. So our results cannot be used by Department of Health to take anyone to court. Okay, because that was never the core goal of the study. I think, but to answer your specific question, what's happened now is the supermarkets have realized, the sensitivity of the product and the power that the consumer actually has. You know, when our study came out, the sale of some of the meat products dropped by 50% all over the country. And I think the reaction of the consumer was, and the continuous interest of the consumer, no one expected that. And that highlights to me the power that the consumer has. And I think the supermarkets have realized that the consumer has power, because ultimately he's the one buying and paying for the product. And so what's happened is the major retailers, they're policing each other now. And I think that's a good sense. So that means that they're becoming self-regulatory. Because if consumer A is in supermarket A and isn't happy with the product, then he just walks out and goes and buys in supermarket B, and you've lost the customer. And that itself, I think, is a good driver to ensure that these retailers are abiding by the regulation.
Professor Hoffman, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. That was Professor Louw Hoffman from the University of Stellenbosch.